Greetings, sorcerers. Welcome back to the Contested Realm. And today, ik ben Jesse Muleman Marshall, because we're heading to Leeuwarden in the Netherlands for the grand finals of our third grand contest of the year, the Trolls of the Realm Grand Contest, which was sold out with 128 players. Congratulations to Richard, Ron, and the rest of the team for putting on such a fantastic event. It was incredible to see the beautiful surrounds that all the players had to play in, and the enormous amount of fun that so many people had at this wonderful event. Thanks to Richard and Ron for sending through this footage of the grand finals so that we could bring it to you, and let's dive straight into the gameplay. So we've got our two players here, Geoffery on the right of your screen playing Archimago, and Kirran on the left playing Imposter. These two have battled through a 128 player field all the way to the grand finals, including the top 8 matches before this one. So no doubt we're going to see some exemplary deck building and gameplay in this match. We should also congratulate Richard and Ron on this very innovative Trolls of the Realm playmat that they've got here. They had one on every table. It was a fantastic looking event. And interestingly, that's also the tower behind them on the playmat there that features in the Master Necromancer artwork by Jeff Menges. So interesting little factoid there. So I've got the players taking their mulligans, and then it looks like Kirran's playing first, so leading off with a step out of the Imposter. So a lot of these Imposter decks here in the metagame currently are looking to utilize Pathfinder as their first transform, if you like, or the first avatar that the Imposter takes the shape of, in order to get that early game advantage out of the Pathfinder from being able to draw spells and still play out sites. So once Kirran gets up to 3 mana, no doubt that's going to be what he's attempting to do to flip into Pathfinder and then try and get a few sites out before Geoffrey's able to knock his mask off, if you like. We saw a Foot Soldier from Geoffrey on turn 1, and now we're seeing an Ajara Exorcist on turn 2 from Kirran. So Ajara Exorcist, an extremely strong piece in the metagame to counter all the big demons like Lord of Lies, as well as a lot of the aggressive spirits coming out of the Avatar of Air and other decks, as well as getting rid of auras as well. So it's a really versatile answer. But here as well, it's also just a powerful turn 2 play to get something down on turn 2 and also have it be a spellcaster. Positional spellcasting can be important. Seeing the Ajara Exorcist here attack onto the Gnome Hollows from Geoffrey, putting Geoffrey down to 18. So first blood there to Kirran. And Geoffrey, on the other hand, has a Foot Soldier here, electing not to block. A lot of the Archimago decks, particularly if we're seeing Earth and potentially Earth Fire from Geoffrey, are looking to utilize Onslaught and a range of tokens to generate some longer term advantage. I'm a little bit surprised that Geoffrey didn't block there to just sandbag the life total a little bit more, given that tokens are likely to be plentiful, but perhaps Geoffrey looking to use something like a Gift on the Wolf on his turn, Gift of the Wolf rather, on his turn to actually take out the Ajara Exorcist. So we'll see. We had a Desert come down as well from Kirran, and no turn 3 play, which is something that Geoffrey will probably be pretty happy to see here. So Geoffrey tapping for a site, and it's a Wizard's Den on turn 3. So this is one that extremely powerful, particularly if you're not too crunched for threshold and you can afford to have a colorless site in your atlas. One that draws you a spell when it enters as a Genesis ability is a pretty strong one to have. Geoffrey leveraging that early in the game here. He's of course going to have to be careful with the discard potentially coming later, with Kirran being a more aggressive deck, but of course Archimago also able to mitigate a little bit of the downside of the discard with the fact that discarding a magic actually draws Geoffrey a third of a spell, so not too bad at all. So we saw a landmass there from Geoffrey, landmassing out a simple village and then allowing him to summon another Foot Soldier. So we now have 2 Foot Soldiers on Geoffrey's side, facing off against the Ajara Exorcist. We do have that transform into Pathfinder on Kirran's side here, moving out, and it looks like a Valley of Delight on Kirran's side of the field, and I think that's got a fire threshold symbol on it there. So the Ajara Exorcist attacks, takes out one of the Foot Soldiers. Both of them aren't able to block together because of the positioning, and the Ajara Exorcist is now potentially in range to attack the Wizard's Den. We see a Pudge Butcher come down on Kirran's side of the field, and that's going to have to be something that Geoffrey answers pretty quickly here. We see Geoffrey go up to 5 mana with a Valley of Delight, and does he have an answer for Pudge Butcher? So he's got Common Sense, which, when you're at 5 mana, means you have access to a berry on the same turn. So we see Common Sense for berry, and at this point, Geoffrey's going to be feeling reasonably good. He's taken 2 damage from the Argiro Exorcist, but his opponent had no turn 3 play, and his turn 4 play was something that didn't impact the board immediately. Pudge, obviously, a huge threat, but when Geoffery's able to answer that, and not just answer it, but get 2 spells or 2 magics into his cemetery, using a common sense to fetch a berry, getting them both into the cemetery on the same turn, that then means that if Kirran has another threat this turn that doesn't immediately impact the board, Geoffery's now got the landmass, common sense, and berry in the cemetery to be able to recast the berry if he wants to, or to recast the common sense next turn. So we see a Paladin's Abbasia come down, which takes out the foot soldier, deals 2 damage to Geoffery. So that's a fantastic play at 6 mana for Kirran here. That's exactly what he wanted to see, because not only does he get rid of the foot soldier blocker, hit the Wizard's Den, get some damage on Geoffery and cause him to discard a card, but he's got a threat that is resilient because of the ward, which Geoffrey's pointing out here now, resilient to Geoffrey's removal. So while Geoffrey was feeling pretty comfortable sitting there on a berry in his cemetery that he was going to likely be able to cast again next turn, he now has 2 enemy minions on the board, the Argiro Exorcist and the Paladin's Abbasia with the ward, and he can't get rid of the bigger one very easily with the berry. I didn't see whether Geoffrey discarded a spell there that turn. It's a little bit hard with some of the action being off the screen here, but his Wizard's Den was attacked, so we'll presume that he discarded something from hand. So I've seen Geoffrey have, I think, about his 6th mana. Of course, I said last turn it was a good play on 6 mana for Kirran, and that's because he has a tower off there on the edge of the board, and that is a really interesting and kind of spicy include here for what seems like an Earth-Fire list in the main. You know, we're playing 3 Threshold Paladins of Abbasia, but he's able to play a tower to get that extra mana to be able to make plays on these key turns, turn 5, 6, 7. Being able to double spell can be absolutely critical, as it was on that turn there. So we see a Pillar of Xeros come down for Geoffrey, and then a Root Spider, which is going underneath his Valley of Delight next to the Paladins of Abbasia, which is, of course, blocked in from going to the Gnome Hollows. So the Paladins of Abbasia can't attack forwards because of the Gnome Hollows. So Geoffrey blocking off the only avenue that the Paladins had to attack him, which is over to the far side of the screen there. Onto site 12. So what is the Paladins going to do to escape this? So while he wasn't able to bury the Paladins because of the ward, he was able to get down that Root Spider and get a couple of life off the Pillar of Xeros as well to just stabilize himself a little bit. So we're seeing a different tower here, and Kirran utilizing the power of Imposter, which, while it's a Pathfinder and has been blocked into that corner of the board, still has the Imposter ability, so it can still tap to play the site, which Kirran had left in his hand. And because that was a Gothic tower, he's able to get the extra mana there. So he creates a new little pathway for his Paladins of Abbasia to make their way the long way around to Geoffrey's home site, perhaps. Also gets the Paladins out of the way so that this Pudge Butcher that he's playing on his home site can threaten to hook in the Archimago next turn. So he's looks like he's rethinking that play, because I was going to say, whilst Geoffrey would be a little bit threatened by the Pudge, he does have that berry in the cemetery, so he is going to be able to deal with that play from a tempo perspective relatively easily. So the question here for Kirran is, does he have anything else? He may be, that Pudge may not be an ideal play, but does he have anything else? And he does. So he's got an Autumn Unicorn. It is a little awkward, this Gnome Hollows Root Spider combination, which is the mainstay of any control decks in Sorcery, and Kirran just remembering to attack with his Argiro Exorcist before passing the turn. The Gnome Hollows and Root Spider combination blocking off what was for Kirran a fantastic start in terms of the amount of power that he's managed to get down onto the board early, but he really doesn't have any good avenues for attack here. So that Root Spider from Geoffrey can move across underneath the Pillar of Xeros if he wants this turn to block off the Autumn Unicorn, and then the Autumn Unicorn's going to have a long way to go around. The Paladins of Abbasia already has a long walk across the board of at least another 2 turns before it's going to be able to attack to the back of the back row there onto the Mount Usar Sanctuary. And here we do see that Root Spider going across under the pillar. So now Kirran next turn is going to have a difficult choice to make. Well, I guess in some ways not a difficult choice, because the Autumn Unicorn's only got one way that it can safely go, but a difficult choice in the longer term as to how is he going to best utilize that unicorn and find a way to actually have an impact on the game. and how is he going to get this Paladins, if at all, more quickly over to Geoffery's side of the board to impact on that Mantisar Sanctuary. But Border Militia here deploying a range of blockers. So we've now had, in some ways, almost the full suite of what Archimago wants to see early. We've had the Gnome Hollows blocking off the middle row, the middle column rather, the Root Spider blocking off one of the other access points. We've got the Pillar of Xeros that's gained a little bit of life. We've got the Mantisar Sanctuary, has a little bit of a backstop if he does end up at Death's Door suddenly. Now really all we need, and we've had the Common Sense, so really now all we need is kind of a Divine Healing, and we've seen the greatest Archimago hits at this point. So that Border Militia is going to block up the board a little bit further here for Kirran, because now not only does he have to get around the Gnome Hollows and get around the Root Spider, he's also got to get around a bunch of tokens. And we'll see potentially another transform. Here it looks like perhaps he has transformed into Sorcerer. I can't quite tell. That does look like the promo Sorcerer there. So potentially looking to utilize the Imposter to get a little bit more card advantage here. So we're seeing the Arjara Exorcist attack in, get rid of one of the foot soldiers that was on the Mantisar Sanctuary. Unfortunately for Kirran here, by moving up the Paladins, he does expose it to having its ward removed, but Colicky Dragonets is a great answer for that. So he's able to deal one to that foot soldier, which is going to mean that Geoffery can't just attack across and get rid of the ward on the Paladins, because that ward is doing a power of work here, and it is representing quite a threat because of that resilience to Geoffrey's removal. But now Geoffrey's able to move that Root Spider out from under the foot soldier on the pillar, and then he's able to actually attack Kirran's Imposter, which is going to get rid of the Sorcerer Mask. So that was kind of a critical moment, because in some ways, Kirran could have left the Autumn Unicorn untapped on top of his Imposter, which was mimicking a Sorcerer at that point. And then even if Geoffery moved the Root Spider forward and disabled the Autumn Unicorn, he wouldn't have then been able to attack over with the foot soldier, because the foot soldier would have been disabled by the Root Spider. So he would have at least got another turn out of the Sorcerer. So I guess Kirran here bargaining that, or betting rather, that the Autumn Unicorn getting into a more aggressive position more quickly is going to have more of an impact on the game than his avatar staying as the Sorcerer for another turn. But that's a really difficult bargain to make. Like, to lose Sorcerer at this point in the game, once you've used it, you can't go back to it. And that card advantage potentially critical to allow the Imposter here to keep up. Now that Pathfinder's gone, he's not able to get that card advantage from sights anymore. He was blocked in the corner already, so not much of a use to staying Pathfinder. But getting to Sorcerer, trying to generate some more card advantage, and then unfortunately losing that Sorcerer immediately. So we're seeing the Dragonets take out one of the foot soldiers. We're seeing the Exorcist trade with the Kettletop. And then the Paladins does finally move up and get 4 damage in. So kudos to Kirran for staying at it with his patient work, getting around the Root Spider, getting around the Gnome Hollows, and finding a way to have that Paladin's impact there. Now we're seeing a Kettletop Leprechaun of Kirran's own here coming down on the Gothic Tower. And Kettletop, of course, being 2 power means it can attack across onto the Gnome Hollows if he wishes. And he's also got the Colicky Dragonets here coming up the middle of the board, meaning that he is going to be able to ping the Archimago at the end of the turn, and also potentially go around that long way that the Paladins has gone as well, if he does want to try and have the Colicky Dragonets attack. He's also playing an Order of the White Wing into the corner, which means that if Geoffery wants to defend against the Order of the White Wing by moving his Root Spider underneath the Pillar of Xeros, then the Colicky Dragonets is going to be able to attack across onto the Valley of Delight. So really what Kirran's trying to do here is stretch Geoffrey's defenses. He's got one Root Spider that's trying to defend 2 sites, and Kirran consistently doing a great job of spreading out his threats so that Geoffrey's not able to corral him into the one site, and he's actually still threatening both that Pillar of Xeros and the Valley of Delight each turn. So some really great tempo play here from Kirran, trying to keep up the pressure as much as possible. And we see here a Shallow Grave, a great site for Geoffrey to hit here. He hits a Gargantula and a Craterize off the Shallow Grave. So Craterize, of course, going to be a useful spell for Geoffrey later as he gets up to higher amounts of mana. Gargantula, one that he no doubt would have liked to draw here. It's a great card against these earth-based decks that are leveraging a lot of ward minions, because of course Gargantula able to grab things and cocoon them, even if they have a ward, because it doesn't target. So it's a great way to deal with things like Paladins of Barzia and Order of the White Wing that are otherwise very efficient and quite resilient. So we do see, speaking of the greatest hits of Archimago, here comes that Divine Healing. Really exactly what Geoffery wanted to see again there, and frustrating for Kirran because he's now staring down the barrel, of course, of that Divine Healing being able to be played again and recurred by the Archimago if he can't find a way to get rid of it out of the cemetery. So a Funeral Pyre here would be fantastic for Kirran if he can leverage a Funeral Pyre to get rid of a few of those critical cards. Maybe the Border Militia, Divine Healing, Craterize. That would certainly set Geoffery back a little bit. Or if he's able to find another way to stop Geoffery from accessing that cemetery. But if he's not, and here with Geoffery having another Border Militia and a few more blockers, it's going to mean that it's going to be challenging for Kirran to keep presenting enough pressure and deal enough damage through those foot soldier defenders to overcome what is potentially another 7 healing from Divine Healing next turn. So Geoffery having a look and having a think about whether he wants to play something from the cemetery here in addition to that Border Militia. Or perhaps that was the Border Militia from the cemetery. Not quite sure what's happening there. Oh, Common Sense. So he is actually banishing the Divine Healing here to play a Common Sense, which is interesting. So perhaps feeling the pressure of so many efficient minions on Kirran's side of the realm, having Paladins of Barzia, Kettletop, Autumn Unicorn, and Order. Geoffery perhaps looking for, I was thinking perhaps removal, but he's finding the cemetery rats here, which makes a lot of sense as well. Finding a way to get more gas into the cemetery, and that Onslaught is exactly what Geoffery would be wanting to see. So Onslaught meaning that not only are these foot soldiers a lot more powerful in terms of their ability to trade, not just the foot soldiers, the rats too, of course, but also they're able to avoid his own root spider, because Onslaught says that the minions can't be disabled, your minions, for that turn, which means that even if they're on top of a root spider, they're able to attack off it because they lose the disabled condition. So we're seeing here 3 cards in Kirran's hand. Not quite sure why that was. So it looks like it's Kirran's turn, and have we had a transform there? No, it looks like I can still see, I think, just Imposter there. So it's going to be interesting to see what can Kirran leverage from the collection in terms of the other avatars to try and bring himself back into this game, because although he's ahead on life, and Geoffery did just banish the Divine Healing, I think, from the cemetery, so he perhaps isn't going to be able to heal up quite as much as we thought, there is still a little bit of a challenge here for Kirran in getting through the defenses. The combination of Border Militia, Root Spider, and Gnome Hollows really gaining Geoffery a lot of life and tempo. So we see the Kettletop takes out the Foot Soldier, or attempts to take out the Foot Soldier. Geoffery declines to add the Cemetery Rats to that fight and have them trade with the Kettletop, which is a good call because the Cemetery Rats is the only one that's now defending against the Paladins. So does Kirran have a way to deal with those rats and get the Paladins an unobstructed attack here? So another Kettletop, probably not exactly what Kirran wants to be seeing at this point in the game. With so much mana, presumably he's actually wanting to see a little bit more gas. So we've got the Kettletop comes down, the Paladins attacks, the Cemetery Rats defends, and then the Colicky Dragonettes gets 1 damage in and gets rid of the Foot Soldier off the Gnome Hollows. So although Geoffery is adding a lot of defenders and a lot of obstacles in Kirran's way, there is also a critical mass of minions building up on the board, and Geoffrey's probably going to be looking here for a turn where he can Earthquake. An Earthquake would be devastating for Kirran. It could get rid of all of those minions that are down towards the bottom right of our screen, the Kettletops and the Paladins, or it could get rid of the minions in the top left of our screen, the Autumn Unicorn and the Order of the White Wing. Either way, if he's able to deal with either of those clusters of minions efficiently, then it's going to be really difficult for Kirran to get back and present enough damage. But if Geoffrey's not, conversely, able to do that, then it's going to be a bit more of a challenge. So we're seeing Assorted Animals here, And presumably that's going to be for 4 to grab a root spider and a cemetery rats, but we will see. Because a second root spider here is going to be potentially devastating for Kirran, because although that doesn't deal as well as Earthquake with those minions at the bottom right of the screen, playing it under the Mount Usar Sanctuary this turn is going to allow Geoffery to disable both the Paladins and the Kettletop, leaving just the Kettletop Leprechaun to attack across onto the Gnome Hollows. And that significantly reduces the threat that Kirran's able to present this turn, because it's going to be one of the minions in the top left of our screen that's going to get in on whichever side the Root Spider chooses not to defend. So presumably the Root Spider is going to stay underneath the valley, force the Autumn Unicorn to not be able to attack, and then it'll just be the Order of the White Wing that's attacking onto the Pillar of Zeros. So if that's the case, we'll see Order and Kettletop attacking next turn, but both the Paladins and the Kettletop on the Mount Usar Sanctuary are getting disabled here by this Root Spider. So Assorted Animals, fantastic piece of tech here from Geoffery, not one that's seen a heap of play. It has, of course, seen play from time to time, and it is powerful as a card advantage engine. But in these kind of control decks, being able to grab Root Spider and something else relevant, in this case being potentially Cemetery Rats, gives it just that little bit more punch, that it's kind of like you pay 4 mana and you get a Root Spider into your hand plus a Cemetery Rats, which is likely to turn into kind of another at least half a card draw plus a blocker. That's a pretty good trade for 4 mana. Plus you get, of course, the Assorted Animals in the Cemetery as well to fuel the Archimago. So in comes that Order of the White Wing. The Root Spider did stay on the under the Valley of Delight to prevent the Autumn Unicorn coming in. And then here I assume we're going to see the Kettletop Leprechaun attack in as well. We see the Witch move up. So the transform there from Kirran was into Witch, and it's an interesting one, because he can use Witch to cause Geoffery to lose some life each turn, which is handy. But he's electing here to move up to get a little bit closer, and that might be for the purposes of another avatar that he's hoping to leverage later. It might be because he's got some positional spells in his hand, although I guess he did have the Paladins of Barzia, but he's now lost that in terms of the spellcaster ability, with it now being disabled. So his other minions now, so there in comes the Kettletop onto the Gnome Hollows. His other minions being the Colicky Dragonettes and the Autumn Unicorn, now having to do their long, slow march across the board. And they're really, I kind of wonder whether leaving the Unicorn where it was might have been better there for Kirran that turn, because now Geoffery gets a free move across with the Root Spider, because next turn the Unicorn's kind of diagonally out of position, meaning that it's not actually adjacent to one of Geoffrey's sites now. And if Geoffery moves out from underneath that Valley of Delight, there's nothing actually threatening that valley anymore. So he kind of gets a free disable on the Order of the White Wing. So I'm not quite sure there for Kirran that there could be some other card he has in hand that means that he's got a longer term plan for how that Autumn Unicorn is going to impact the board. But being there on his home side is not a great place for it to be. And even that Colicky Dragonette's moving it across the right-hand side of the board with that Root Spider blocking up the Mount Usar Sanctuary is really not an open avenue of attack. So I almost would have left the Colicky Dragonettes on the windmill there, left the Root Spider where it was, and then seen what happened. We do have that kind of board clear that we were talking about earlier. Major Explosion comes in, takes out all 3 minions there on the middle section of the board, with the Kettletop Leprechaun on the Gnome Hollows kind of being the most important one, funnily enough, even though it was the lowest power, because it was the only one that was actually in an attacking position. And really the only one that was likely to be in an attacking position for the next couple of turns. That Order of the White Wing now disabled by the Root Spider. Cemetery Rats comes down for Geoffery. And now we're seeing that card advantage and the slow grind of value from that Assorted Animals really coming to bear here, with another, looks like a landmass hitting the Cemetery for Geoffery. Another blocker up critically for him as well on a key site. And that's now able to cover that Gnome Hollows if Kirran is able to get another minion that's small enough to attack in there. The Cemetery Rats is able to cover that and defend. And now really no threats left on the board for Kirran. So what was looking like potentially a critical mass that was building up, even despite Geoffery's defenses and his attempts to parry away Kirran's damage. It was starting to look like between the Unicorn, the Colicky Dragonets, the Paladins, the two Kettletops, that there was starting to be enough pressure build up that Kirran might be able to overwhelm Geoffery. That well-placed Root Spider and then the major explosion to take out the rest of the board really put paid to that. So we've got the Root Spider still sitting underneath the order, so not much happening there. And presumably Kirran here thinking about, is it worth it to tap the Witch to cause Geoffery to lose life? Is there... He's just drawn a side off the Kettletop, so does he want to play that instead to keep ramping up his mana? And this is where that loss of the Sorcerer a few turns ago is really cruel, because potentially Kirran looking at not enough options in hand to keep up the pressure. Because we know that uninterrupted, without any disruption, Archimago is going to be able to grind out enough long game advantage with its ability to reuse the spells in the cemetery. So if Kirran's not able to keep up any pressure and any tempo here, then it's going to be really tough for him to close it out. But that's a big play. So major explosion of his own. Kirran says, anything you can do, I can do exactly the same. And he plays out a major explosion. But this one takes out Cemetery Rats and critically deals 5 damage to the Archimago. So 5 is a big chunk when you're only on 10. And when you've banished your other Divine Healing, as Geoffery did, or banished the Divine Healing you've already played. I guess the question and the read that Kirran has to have is the banishing of the Divine Healing earlier an indication that Geoffery has another one in hand? Or does he have some other healing that he's going to be able to use to stabilize here? And of course, we don't know what threats Kirran has in hand. He could have something quite significant of his own to add to the board next turn, or some ability to deal a substantial amount of damage to Geoffery, potentially in combination with the Witch's ability, that if Geoffery doesn't gain life here, 5 is a precarious place to be when you're staring down an Earthfire player with as much with as much mana available as what Kirran has. So Geoffery taps the Archimago, plays another Shallow Grave, which is kind of perfect again. So the Pendragon Legacy comes down, and he's now got a plethora, a toolbox of cards in the cemetery. He's got a Pendragon Legacy that can draw him a spell if that's what he wants, if he just wants to fish for a random spell for 1 mana. He's got the Landmass that can get him more sights if that's what he needs, although that's probably the least likely out of those. He's got now a Border Militia as well. So Border Militia, in combination with the Onslaught that's still sitting there in the cemetery, is potentially a lot of damage for Geoffery to turn pretty quickly now onto Kirran. And the fact that Onslaught has the can't be disabled clause really coming in clutch here when you're combining it with your own Root Spiders, because that is going to be, another couple of damage that Geoffrey's going to be able to get off that site, the Pillar of Xeros there on the far side, where the Order of the White Wing is being disabled by the Root Spider. If he does play the Border Militia, he's going to get a Foot Soldier there. And then when he plays Onslaught, he's going to be able to attack off that onto the lone tower that's in the far corner for 2 damage. And then not only that, but any defense that Kirran has in terms of his Order of the White Wing is still disabled, so it's not going to be able to attack back or to defend the Foot Soldier, and the Foot Soldier is likely to get another attack in next turn. So it looks like we are seeing that Onslaught being played as well. So the Assorted Animals, the Onslaught, and something else being banished. To play out the Onslaught, we see the attack in here on the Witch, which is going to actually get rid of the Witch Mask from the Imposter, and deal the 2 damage, of course. Seeing 2 damage in here off another site where there's a Root Spider, the Mount Usar Sanctuary. Then we've got another untapped Foot Soldier there on top of the Imposter, which presumably is going to attack over onto the Valley of Delight or somewhere else. But no, it looks like that one's staying untapped. Interesting. So Geoffery leaving a couple of the Foot Soldiers here untapped. The one on the Gnome Hollows and the one underneath the Imposter. And I think he's having a look at the cemetery here for Kirran. Seeing the Kettle Top, the Colicky Dragonettes, the Argyro Exorcist. So what can Kirran present here? Nothing. Okay. So that's kind of manna from heaven for Geoffery, because although he put a fair amount onto the board there that turn, he was kind of vulnerable, staying on 5. And there really is a question there as to, although Kirran lost the Witch, all it would have taken is another major explosion, another big burn spell, and he potentially could have put Geoffery to death's door. If he had something like a Lava Flow, for example, he could have potentially stepped, I guess next turn Lava Flow would be good, being able to step up Lava Flow, the Archimago, and kill the Root Spider as well, and unlock the Paladins, which would potentially allow him to put Geoffery to death's door by attacking across onto the Shallow Grave. So yeah, Lava Flow could be a big play for him next turn. But what's he going to look like in terms of what's his life total going to be by the time we get to next turn? Because Geoffery, of course, still got that Craterize in the cemetery as well. So we're seeing 3 spells get banished, and is that was it the Pendragon Legacy perhaps? Because I think we saw a draw. And then what's Geoffery got here? So he's tapping. So he's attacking for... Or was that potentially an Onslaught rather than a Pendragon Legacy? It might have been another Onslaught. Seeing Geoffery draw a sight, which is not a good sign if you're Kirran in terms of potential Craterize plays. We're seeing the Root Spider move across under the Shallow Grave, which is a Craterize if ever I've seen one. Because Craterize, of course, affects above and below the relevant sites. So we see 2, 4, 6, putting Kirran down to 9, and then Craterize comes down, boom. Putting Kirran to death's door. Getting rid of the Order of the White Wing, that Root Spider under the pillar, but Geoffery's not too fussed about that. A bunch of the Foot Soldiers. The other Foot Soldier should also be dead, I think, but that's okay. The Root Spider survives, the Kettle Top dies, the Paladin survives. But it looks like that was a Craterize from hand, which means there's now a Craterize sitting in the cemetery. And that is bad news for Kirran. Because unless he can get Geoffery to death's door, get rid of the ward from the Mount Usar Sanctuary, and get onto the same site so that Geoffrey's unable to Craterize safely, it has to also be on the same site, but close enough to an edge that Geoffery can only move closer to the middle rather than further away from the middle in order to be safe from the Craterize. Anyway, that's a difficult one. Difficult line to see how that's going to be possible here for Kirran. So he attacks, puts Geoffery to death's door. The Archimago moves across onto the Mount Usar Sanctuary. As it's free move from the Mount Usar Sanctuary, gets a ward. And then Kirran doesn't really have to... dealing with the ward this turn doesn't really matter because he can't kill Geoffery till next turn anyway. So really it's a matter of can he both get rid of the ward and deal 1 damage to Geoffery next turn. That's if he gets it next turn. Firstly, the problem is he's got to get away from this Craterize that he knows is sitting there. And Kirran taking a look at the Craterize and thinking, is there a way that I can force the issue here? That I can get rid of that ward, make Geoffery vulnerable to his own Craterize, and then potentially get my avatar into a situation, into a position where Geoffery can't safely cast the Craterize without dealing 1 to his own avatar. So Kirran having a good think about that, and then moves up onto the Wizard's Den. Becomes the Archimago himself. Cast the Firebolts, which is going to deal 1 to the ward and then another 2 damage to the Archimago. So Geoffery now exposed on death's door as well. Kirran has the Archimago, but does he have a spell that's going to allow him to get his Archimago across, far enough across the board that Geoffrey's unable to safely cast it. So he really needs something. He's got a critical strike. So he really needed anything to get his Archimago across onto that shallow grave, I think would have done it. I think would have meant that Geoffrey couldn't get safely far enough away. But as it was, no such luck in hand for Kirran, no way to get away from that second Crater Rise, and Geoffrey takes out the win in what was an incredibly hard-fought match. Both players played incredibly well. It was an amazing depiction of the ebb and flow of sorcery. We had Kirran coming out of the gates hard, Geoffrey presenting those early defenses, having enough life gain between the Pillar of Xeros and the Divine Healing to stabilize in the mid game, and Kirran just unable to overcome the combination of Gnome Hollow's Root Spider and the life gain to deal enough to Geoffrey in time before the Crater Rises came raining down on him from the Archimago. So an incredibly thematic game, the Imposter trying out all sorts of different guises, not able to deceive the Archimago, who was able to wield the power of magic and get Kirran down to death's door and then deal the death blow. So I hope you enjoyed. It was a fantastic match from Geoffrey and Kirran. We have some more grand contests coming up very soon. We've got the grand contest in Melbourne, Australia, towards the end of July. We've got the grand contest in New Zealand next month. And then we've got a range of other grand contests coming up very soon as well. So check out the SorceryTCG website to find a grand contest near you. Of course, it's Cornerstone season as well. So have a look. You can go to the Sorcery Play Network, filter for Cornerstone tier, and have a look to find your local Cornerstone championship so you can head down and contest the realm. Until then, we'll see you next time with the next grand contest video, and keep on contesting the realm.